that they're refuting. But so the argument is there was no rain before the flood. This is not a direct teaching of Scripture, so there should be no dogmatism. And your response was, there is no way to know the truth of this one. And then you go on to explain that, because the Scripture is silent on this issue. So my question is, on matters that the Scriptures are silent on, is there no way to know about them?
Okay, no, there may be ways to know. I love science. That's what scientific explorations are for, and scientific observations. But as far as was there rain before the flood, I think my point was the Bible mentions during the creation week, a mist went forth and watered the garden. It's never mentioned again until all of a sudden it rains in the days of Noah. The assumption is that it never rained until the flood, but I think it'd be impossible to prove that from Scripture is my point. So I think that we could look at scientific evidence and discover many things that the Bible is silent about. The Bible never mentions computers, never mentions cars, doesn't mention a lot of things. That doesn't mean, they don't exist. But I think there are things the Bible is so clear on, like the age of the earth. In 6 days, the Lord made heaven and earth. Adam brought death into the world. I think the Bible is so clear on these topics that it's not a matter of the Bible is silent and we have to guess what we believe. The Bible is clear, and we have to decide what we believe. That's my point.
And then my response would be, can you show me, or is there a place where it actually says that the creation days were 24-hour periods? And also, does it refer, so I don't see gravity in there, I don't see DNA, there's, as you mentioned, computers. Where do you see the...
Okay, Exodus chapter 20, in the Ten Commandments, God wrote it on a rock with his finger. He doesn't stutter. He said, in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. And he rested the seventh day. And he's telling Moses, I want you to honor the seventh day because I did it in 6 days. Later in Exodus chapter 31, verse 17, God said, it's a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested. If the earth is billions of years old, God lied when he said he rested on the seventh day. Because it wasn't the seventh day. It was the X number of bazillionth day, So I think it's accusing God of either not being able to tell time or simply lying to say that the earth is billions of years old. And I don't think it's heresy to think the earth is old. I think it's heresy to teach there was death before sin. On that one, I'll stand my ground. Okay?
All right, we're taking a break now. And so if you have questions, if you've written them on a 3x5 card, if you can hand them to one of the people at the exits, and then they'll make sure that I get them. And part of the second half will be allowing questions from the audience. When I say allowing questions, we'll review the cards. So thanks. We're going to take a 10-minute break. Dr. Hovind, it's your turn to ask Jamin a question.
Yes, sir. Is the God of the Bible capable of creating in 6 days? Could it have been 6 days, 6,000 years ago? And could it be that he did leave us an accurate record in the Bible of how he did it, so that the average person can read this record and not need to have a physics PhD explain it to him? In other words, the average person reading the Bible, in my opinion, is not going to come up with billions of years, okay? So do we have to have a guru tell us what this book says, i.e. a cult leader, or can the average person read it? So my question is kind of complex, but could God have done it in 6 days, 6,000 years ago, and left us an accurate record, and the average person can read it and understand it? Or why is 99% of the Christians wrong about this, I guess? I'm trying to figure out.
Sure. Well, first of all, I guess I don't agree that 99% of Christians agree on this, but even if they did, that wouldn't be good enough for me, because our measure is what is true and what's called for in the Scriptures. So the question is, if the average person can kind of understand what it means, what's buried in that, in my view, is the assumption that the simplest interpretation is always right. And we could say that, yes, if we gave the Bible to somebody who had never seen it before, had no education, they could read it and find that it must be the familiar days that I'm familiar with, the 24-hour days. Well, that's true. They would probably do that. And they would also interpret many other passages of the Bible wrong, most likely. That's why we have discipleship, we have missions, we have churches. That's why we have theologians. We need help. We don't just take the most plain meaning. Some things are more complex than others. So we do our best with the evidence that we have. Sometimes it is very easy to interpret. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we get the wrong idea, such as in Revelation 1:7, where it says that he will, well, let's go to it here. Then I saw the 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, and they called the 4 winds. You could take that literally. In fact, Calvin and Luther did. They held that to literally mean that the earth is flat. Okay? So, yeah, we could always take the most familiar interpretation or the easiest to access, and sometimes we'd be right, sometimes we'd be wrong. But it was scientific observation, better science, not better exegesis, that helped Christians in the church to change their view on the flat earth. And same thing with geocentrism, where you had scriptures that pointed to the rising of the sun and the sun going around the earth. It was a figurative language. We don't take that literally anymore, but there was a time that we did, that many Christians did, and they were wrong about it. I don't think there's anybody here who believes that the earth is flat and goes around, or that the sun goes around the earth. So we need the help of scientists and Christians and pastors, and in all these disciplines, we need to do the best that we can to find out what's happening there. So that's my very long answer.
Okay, as a follow-up to that then, that sort of is a red herring, which is an argument used to draw attention away from the question that's asked. The fact that other passages of Scripture are obviously figurative does not really mean anything as far as the Genesis passage. Is the Genesis passage then, my question I guess was, is God capable of doing it in 6 days? Could it be only 6,000 years old? And could it be the Genesis account is not figurative, but actually 6 days?
Yeah. Yes.
It could be.
Yes, it absolutely could be. God could have done it in an instant. Okay. Or he could have done it in 100 billion years. He could have made Adam's skin blue. But the account doesn't mention that. It doesn't get into those specifics. We don't have any reason to believe that Adam was blue, right? I mean, there's a lot of other things that it doesn't tell us. So, yes, it's possible. God could have done many things, but there's not evidence, or the evidence doesn't support, in my view, that he did it in 6 24-hour days.
So what I shared earlier about the trees being made before the sun and the insects being made after the sun, and about Adam being 130 when Seth was born and no death till Adam sinned, you keep saying there's no evidence from Scripture. I think I gave a lot of evidence from Scripture that points to 6,000 years ago. That's what the dates add up to. That's what Christians through history have taught by the thousands. I think probably many people in this room would say they see it as it's obvious. It was 6 days, 6,000 years ago. But so they're all wrong?
I'm not going to say for sure if they are or aren't. I interpret it differently. Again, it's man's interpretation of science, man's interpretation of the Scriptures that is fallible. So, yes, there's evidence. What does the evidence tell us? And in my view, the evidence is consistent with science in Genesis that it was very old and that there was time for the whole thing. So, yep, sorry.
All right, we're going to move on and have Jamin ask a question of Dr. Hovind.